Hey there guys, Bizzleberry here, Grandmaster Support, bringing you another Season 10 guide. We've done loads already for lots of other tank, enchanter and mage supports already on the channel. If you haven't looked at those, then I'd advise you after this video is done to have a look. Be sure to subscribe if you're interested in more tier lists as well, and other support champions I haven't quite yet covered. So today we're looking at Braum. We're going to go through the runes, the items, the abilities, the skill orders, and any advanced moves that you should consider taking and doing into your solo queue games. So we're going to talk about the runes to start off with. So Guardian is the main rune for Braum. There isn't really any variance there in terms of the keystone. Guardian recently, we're talking as of midway through Season 10, we're on 10.12. Guardian got nerfed in terms of, in my opinion, it got nerfed. They've removed the movement speed on the Guardian, so it no longer, when it procs, it doesn't give you movement speed anymore. Because of this, Braum's lost a little power potential in terms of catching people out, but, you know, Guardian can still be easily be procced off the Braum with some of its abilities, and honestly, it's the best option there. It could be tempting into thinking of taking Aftershocks, great, but getting that off pre-ultimate is difficult, and even with your ultimate it feels like it's kind of wasted anyway, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend that at all. I think Guardian is the only option, unfortunately, for this one. Demolish is a really good rune in terms of taking down turrets, especially if you made a kill or two in the laning phase and you're just pushing in that lane. Gives you a quick plate. Otherwise, if you feel like you're going to be pushed in a lot and not going to be able to do anything to turrets, then Font of Life isn't a great rune, but it's better than nothing if you're not going to be able to get the turrets. So generally 95% of the time you're taking Demolish. Bone Plating is the standard rune here. The Second Wind and the Bone Plating is meant to be purely for the laning phase. So if you're against double poke, then take the Second Wind to help sustain during the laning phase. Otherwise, Bone Plating if you're against burst. If you feel like you can get away with conditioning, that is a big spike in terms of extra tankiness that you can provide. If you're like the only tank on the team, conditioning can be an okay option. And if you're not against like double siege, just maybe want to take it a tad slower in the laning phase, but because you won't have the Bone Plating. But if you can get to the 12-minute mark without much happening, then conditioning is a pretty good option there. Finally here, you've got two options here. You've got Overgrowth and Unflinching. Overgrowth, in my opinion, is the better option. It will give you more effective health, and Braum scales off some of the health that you have. So Overgrowth is generally the clear option here, but if the enemy team does have a lot of crowd control, then Unflinching is an okay option too, but generally Overgrowth is the best here. Inspiration, you definitely want Approach Velocity, as Braum has slows and you'll move faster towards enemies that are slowed, and that will help you land your passive hits that we'll talk about a bit later on. So Approach Velocity is a must, and extra bonus points if you have an AD carry in your bot lane that also does crowd control, because that will also help you get a little bit closer towards the enemy. And then you've got Biscuit Delivery here as the primary option. Otherwise, secondary option is Minion Dematerializer. It kind of depends whether or not you can get towards those cannon minions or not. Like, once again, if you're going into like the double poke, as we were talking about earlier with the Second Wind, Minion Dematerializer can make it so that you don't lose out too much HP getting 3 of those cannon minions. Also, Braum's pushing power is pretty bad. So Minion Dematerializer can help you, say if you do win a trade and there's a cannon minion up that you need to push in really quickly, that is a great way to just get that wave pushed in to the turret to make the lane reset as quickly as possible. If you're not against double poke, then just take the cookies. It's okay sustain. If you're also thinking about maybe taking the Stoneplate route, you could go Approach Velocity with a perfect timing, the stopwatch, but I feel like you need either some sustain or you need to make sure that you can get those cannon minions safely, as it can be a little bit difficult to maneuver around in the lane sometimes. These runes should always be standard here. The attack speed to help land more passive, to proc more stuns and the resistances are purely based on what you're up against. If you're against a enchanter or a mage with an AD carry, then you want both of these. If you're against like a pike and an AD carry and an AD jungler, then you take the double armor then, because that will give you the most benefit for the first 12, 13, 14 minutes of the game. Nothing really else to deviate from these runes. They're pretty set in stone and basic. Nothing too crazy here that you can do particularly on Braum in terms of builds and things. So this is generally what you'll see in the runes that you're seeing right now is what will be in 99% of your games, I think. So we're going to move over into the practice tool. We'll talk very briefly about the runes that you can take, not the runes, sorry, the summoner spells that you can take on Braum. So flash, as always, is key, and then you could either take the exhaust here or an ignite. Now the ignite is for kill pressure and lane. Like if you're playing with an aggressive AD carry like a Lucian, which is generally the best matchup for Braum, ignite is the way to go. Your AD carry will generally be taking exhaust anyway, so that allows you to be pretty aggressive quite early on. The exhaust is if your AD carry is taking heal and you're really concerned about assassins. That way you can then nullify their damage a lot while you're waiting for your stun to actually proc on the target on your abilities. So here now we'll start talking about the items. I just need to give myself a lot of money here. Might as well give myself all the levels here while we're doing this. So when you start the game, you'll be taking the shoulder guards here. That's because Braum's, you're not taking Relic Shield because Braum has only one ability here that has AP ratios, and that's the ultimate. So it's completely pointless taking ability power on Braum. So just take the AD. It makes you do bigger punches. So once you've got your shoulder guards, you've done the laning phase a little bit, you've got different avenues here of where to go. I generally like the cooldown reduction. The early item recommendations here are actually pretty nice. I think you would need boots, especially now that Guardian hasn't got the movement speed in anymore. I think you kind of need to get those boots in as quickly as possible. Not just a tier 1, but to a tier 2 option as well. Once again, as always on the tanks, you want to be looking at what the enemy team has. So if you're against a lot of slows, particularly on the bot side, boots of swiftness can help you be a little bit aggressive if you're already in that avenue of getting to be really aggro. Otherwise, it's one of these tankier boots, the Merc Treads and the Ninja Tabi, which will generally be your purchases for most of your games. So the Merc Treads will help you against the tenacity, so all this crowd control that's happening on the enemy team to help you get into the front line a little bit easier. If you're against a lot of physical damage and auto attacking champions, then the Ninja Tabi here is the best option. So try and weigh out what you're playing up against, particularly for the early and the mid game, and weigh what you're going to need. So the Ninja Tabi is the ideal because it's cheaper, but Merc Treads is cheaper. What am I talking about? They're both the same price, but you want to choose between, I meant the boots of swiftness, sorry. So the resistances are, you know, whatever you're up against. The ideal, it doesn't really matter too much, just honestly what you're up against. And then if you're feeling like you can be really aggro, the cheaper option is boots of swiftness, but then you don't have that as much tankiness. So you need to factor in between being a really, really aggressive Braum, getting in, doing some of the plays, or being a little bit more of the front line, which will generally be most of the cases. So you got your boots in really early so you can engage. I would recommend more towards the mana here. Braum's mana can go, you can lose your mana quite quickly by throwing out your Q, which we'll talk about later. So Glacial Shroud is a really nice pickup, especially, I wouldn't pick this up if you're against like a AP bot side though, but as long as it's no AP bot side, Glacial Shroud will give you the most value here. If you are against an AP bot side, then I would actually lean, well, you'd be buying the Merc Treads for starters, and then I probably would buy a Null Mantle first, and then pick into the Glacial Shroud. In most cases, it's just picking up the Glacial Shroud, and then you have two options here. Kindle Gem is nice effective health for Braum, but then it delays you from a key item. It can be tempting to go this avenue, just to pick up another 10% cooldown reduction, but generally it's better to go Zeeks. You pick up the extra magic resistance that you could be missing out anyway for those mid-game team fights, and the Zeeks proc, you'll be trying to get into the front line as much as possible, and Zeeks, once you have to use it on a target, and whenever you ult, you both get a little buff. The Zeeks wearer gets a slow aura around them, a tiny one, so you need to be in melee range of them, and your AD carry, which is usually who you have it on, will have empowered auto attacks. So make sure you first get this on to your AD carry, and then when you're popping your ultimate, then it will then proc. But the Zeeks is a very good cost-effective item anyway. You got the 10% CDR, the resistance are pretty nice. Then once you moved onto that, usually you move onto the Knight's Vow. That gives you another 10% cooldown reduction. Another relatively cheap item as well. And that is generally what you'd be taking for like 90% of your games. That is a core. Now, if you feel like you really need to be the absolute front line of your team, and you don't care about the utility that these items bring, then you'll be going Stoneplate first. So these are the only two routes that I would really recommend. So the Zeeks into the Knight's Vow, or you'll be taking Gargoyle Stoneplate. This will make you really, really tanky, and you have a stopwatch quite early on for any stasis baits or anything like that, or if you get tower dove. You want to pop that once you're in the middle of a group of enemies, and then you get an extra 40 armor and 40 magic resistance. The problem with this item though, it does make you really tanky, but you have no utility, you have no cooldown reduction, and you have no health. So from the Gargoyle Stoneplate, I would then advise you to go into Knight's Vow, or juggling between like these two items, like picking up the Zeeks and the Kindle Gem, finishing off the Zeeks and finishing off the Knight's Vow. The reason I say that is because your effective health, you have a high amount of resistances, which do scale off your W as well, which we'll talk about later on, but your health will be really low. So you can have a ridiculous amount of resistances, but if your health is really low, you're still going to die pretty quickly, especially if any enemies have true damage. But that is a valid build as well. You could always pick up these two items and then go into the Gargoyle Stoneplate last item, but then that's a little bit late for you to be that front line. The other recommended items here are not great. I wouldn't advise you going into any of these offensive items. Righteous Glory is really expensive. Yes, it gives you a lot of movement speed to engage, but Braum generally being an engage, a solo engage, isn't that great. Randuin's is good against a lot of crit, but it's overall still not a particularly great item, and Redemption will make you way too squishy in fights. So those three items are basically your core. If you're against a lot of magic damage, then you can go the Locket route. Just bear in mind you won't have, once again, too much bonus health for the shield proc that gives when you activate it, but it does give you a lot of magic resistance, and it is a tiny bit of help to any AoE happening there, but it's okay. It's not terrible, but I wouldn't really, I haven't really invested in this item for many years because it got nerfed and hasn't been buffed since, but if you like it, it's not a terrible item to purchase. And when you're picking potions for those fights later on around key objectives, it's always going to be the Elixir of Iron, as it gives you 25% tenacity, and it does give you much needed extra health. Right, so hopefully the items give you a decent direction. A lot of the tank items are pretty similar. So if you're used to playing something like Leona, you're probably used to these three items at least anyway. So let's get rid of the minions and we'll put some target dummies down. So the most important ability on Braum is his passive. It's really what makes Braum. So if we attack this dummy here, you can see there's 4 charges here. So Braum, whenever he does a passive, or when he lands his Q, which is this projectile, it puts a debuff on the enemy. And then once all 4 charges have popped, whether it's from your own auto attacks, a Q from you, or any allied champions doing auto attacks, or things like Ezreal Q that does imply an on hit on their spell, will also contribute to this effect. So Ezreal Q will add to this. You've got another champion that, as I mentioned earlier, Lucian, being really good, because every time Lucian uses an ability, he shoots twice. So it's 2 auto attacks. So if you can get an auto and a Q and like a Lucian double auto there instantly, then they get stunned straight away. Not only does it stun them, but they also take bonus damage. So the debuff does drop off if no auto attacks have happened for 4 seconds. So you got to make sure that you're catching up to the target if you're wanting to pursue them. So now we talked a little bit about the Q and how that applies a passive stack. That's the only ability on Braum that will apply a passive stack. Your Q ability will also slow the enemy, and its damage is based off Braum's maximum HP. As we mentioned in the items, it's not easy to get bonus HP on Braum. Unfortunately, a lot of the support items aren't great at that. You'll have your health upgrades from your support item, Tenacity Potion, and maybe from the Knight's Vow. But apart from that, it's not a huge source of what you're getting from items. But it is a noticeable amount of damage, particularly in the early parts of the laning phase, and it's the ability that you'll be maxing first. It's got quite a slow projectile. It is dodgeable quite easily if the enemy can read it. But once you land it, it's hard for the enemy to get away if you're definitely going to be following up. That's why Braum generally does pretty well with aggressive AD carries. Braum's second ability is his dash, it's his W. He can do this to minions or champions. It gives both of you resistances based on your total resistances. So you can see the math there. I'm sure it will change patch by patch, but it makes you and your target a little bit tankier. This will also help towards proccing Guardian. So say if usually you would have to be in this circle here to proc Guardian, but if you W to an ally and then they take the threshold damage, then the Guardian will proc on both of you. Can you still cast W on yourself? Yes, you can. But you won't, obviously, you can't dash to yourself, but you can give yourself the buff. But ideally you're giving it to someone else. A little trick here in the advanced move section is you can actually do this to a cannon minion and it can screw over the enemy AD carry from last hitting. Fun fact. Braum's next ability is his wall. This blocks a lot of projectiles and it's very similar to Yasuo Wind Wall. So it will block any, so basically stop the path of all projectiles coming through. So if you've seen Senna ult, it will block the damage portion of that and it won't go through Braum. You can do the same as well with Ornn ultimate, his ram. You can use your wall to block the ram. So when Ornn channels it, say if the Ornn is where the enemy target dummy is at the moment, you could wall behind you as it's coming through to delete the ram straight away. So usually in a little skirmish, before you get your ultimate, say if your AD carry is a little bit too far overextended in front, I guess we can stand the other way for here. You would W to your ally, pop your wall up, and then throw out any Qs and just try and disengage or engage depending on resources. So you would W to get the stats through and so that you're in range, pop the wall up to protect them, and then throw out your Q. So do bear in mind you can place this wall wherever you like. Just you need to make sure you're clicking in the right direction of where you want to block it, because sometimes you see Brahms blocking the wall in the wrong direction. It happens, but just be careful where you're placing that. Finally, Brahms' ultimate knocks up the first target, and it does like a little knock up on the behind them, but not really. It's kind of hard to explain. Maybe we could get some more dummies in here actually. Let's pop those in. That was too close to the fountain. So the first target gets hit by that more, by the knock up, and then there's a little stagger on the ones at the back. So it does interrupt everyone in that line, but the one that gets hit at the front line gets interrupted the most. So that blue line, the fissure that's on the ground there, that's a slow. That's an AoE slow. So with an engage with your ultimate, you're looking at a W, Q, pop, W, sorry, let me start this again. You W, you E, you ulti, and then you Q, and then you auto whoever you can, depending whether or not you want to keep engaging or not. So Braum has an okay engage. It's a little bit of a slow duration coming through, so it's the people at the back can easily sidestep it and move out of the way. But if they're right in front of you, it's pretty difficult to dodge. So ideally you get as close to them as possible, and then as they're a little bit staggered and slowed anyway, it should be really easy for you to land your Q and just try and get those stacks up as going as fast as possible. So that is like the most basic thing you can do on Braum in terms of an engage. We've showcased that, you know, you could do a W on a minion to stop the AD carry from taking CS. You can also say if minions are attacking a cannon minion, and you can be really aggressive here. You can wall up so that the cannon shots still go through you and kill the cannon minion, but then the enemy AD carry can't last hit the cannon. It's quite difficult to pull off in a lot of circumstances, but if the enemy have to respect you under the turret, that's how you can deny them CS. You can take away about 100 gold off the enemy if you're able to get that deep and do that. And if it does start getting a little bit iffy, you can then W back to your AD carry. But it's a little bit of a risky move, especially if you're all on like 100% HP and if they have crowd control, because the last thing you want to be is crowd controlled under a turret when you've got no minions nearby. But it's not impossible to do in a game. So the skill order, as we kind of mentioned, you max Q, and then you max your E, and then you max your W. That's how I prefer it. I prefer having my E ready in fights as long as possible. It takes the cooldown off by a decent amount, and the damage reduction that you get from having a shield as well is a pretty decent amount too. The W scaling is okay, but personally I'd rather have something that can block all projectiles up as much as possible, rather than having the dash and the slight extra resistances from that. So Q first, then your E, and then level your W. I don't think there's anything else to go and talk about Braum. His kit is very... I can't really think of the right word, but there isn't too much going on. There aren't really too many outplays you can do. His abilities are quite easy to read. He's not too difficult to play. It's all about, the most important thing on Braum is just understanding managing his passive stacks and when to follow up on them and when to not. Yeah, he's a pretty straightforward champion to play. So if you land your Q, then you can think about whether or not going in. You can use your Q to poke a little bit during the laning phase if the enemy steps forward. But he's basically the Janna of tanks. You have an engage option a little bit. But it's also a much better disengage because they'll be running into you like that, and then you can then disorientate them quite a bit, and then you can slow them away and you can generally get away. So he generally does better when they're coming towards you rather than the other way around. But hopefully this guide helps you out and gives you an idea of how to play Braum. These guides are designed for new players into League and into the support role. If you do want to check up on any other champions guides that I've made, make sure you have a look at the playlist on the channel. And if Braum's not your fancy, then have a look and see if there's something else that might be. Other than that, keep a lookout for more guides every single day on the YouTube channel, and don't forget to subscribe. Take care, guys, and see you tomorrow for another one.